All right, welcome back, y'all. This is going to be Unit 3, Lecture 8. So, we're going to be talking about non market based instruments like standards, direct control, etc. Okay, so we'll jump right into Section 8.1, which is about standards. And these are simply laws regulating the standards of products like purity or efficiency, right? And so, again, this is going to be like the US auto fleet miles per gallon standards, fuel purity standards, light bulb efficiency standards, all these sorts of things, right? We have two types, technology based, which just means you got to meet sort of a minimum technology requirement. So this was like, maybe y'all are a little too old to remember, too young to remember, but they were trying to, I guess they did, but they phased out the old style light bulbs with like the filament because they were really like electricity inefficient. And so they phased them out. So that's like a minimum technology based requirement. Another one would be like the catalytic converter on your car, which helps to clean up some of the um, your exhaust, right? Then you have performance based standards. So these are going to be like miles per gallon, which we talked about in the last chapter. And then things like energy consumption standards in, trying to build out new units of housing and stuff or factories, right? And so the EU is pretty famous about having standards for energy use per square foot, depending on how your building is classified, factory, commercial, versus residential, these sorts of things. But generally, there's a per square foot energy efficiency standard in buildings and construction material and all these sorts of things. Um, the problem with these generally is they can be ignored without proper monitoring, and monitoring is expensive, right? And they can be cheated. So Volkswagen, in fact, was caught, I guess, about 15 years ago, maybe, cheating. They had declared that their little Volkswagen diesel engine was basically like super low exhaust, but they just put in this thing that faked it basically in all their cars. And this group, I think they were out of UCLA, these like engineering students caught them. And Volkswagen, like the CEO got fired, a bunch of their corporate leaders got fired. They had to pay huge fines to the American government and to the EU. So yeah, I mean, these sorts of things can be cheated quite often, and you'll probably get caught eventually, but maybe not because the monitoring again is pretty low for a lot of these things. You also have just like, I don't know, I guess from the Homo economicus economics, theoretical perspective, you have just weird behavior, right? That doesn't really fit the pattern, right? Like if it was all about energy efficiency and even like miles per gallon efficiency, then everybody would drive a tiny little smart car or something. You know what I mean? But like, obviously, the South loves big trucks. So I think economists would say like that's outside the realm of standard economic behavior, right? A Homo economicus. And it also has to generally be implemented in waves, these standards, right? You can't just say, like, tomorrow I need all of this to change. This takes time, right, to implement, especially when you're talking about like miles per gallon standards, because these cars are engineered like years in advance, these sorts of things. And so it takes time to implement new technologies. Okay. Section 8.1.1 pollution standards. At one point, they make the claim that taxes are more efficient and that under the standards regime, the state takes in no revenue for cheating. But I don't think that's true. Um, Standards often are not only a little bit more easy to implement because you don't have to convince the citizenry that you're raising taxes, but there are fines involved if you don't meet them, right? And so, like, the government can take in revenue if these standards are not met, not through taxation, but through the court system, right? And so, like, I thought that was a weird thing for them to say. Okay. They do make a good point, however, about sort of the enforcement and monitoring difficulties that we talked about. And I'll break it down here. So you need the technology, right? And somebody's got to pay for that, either the company or the government. You need the employees to monitor the equipment that is doing the monitoring, right? You need the court systems to be able to sort of step in effectively, right? So you need proper institutional organizations. You have someone has to pay the installation and the maintenance costs. You have to have properly functioning bureaucratic expertise, right, to even know where to set the standards, how the standards are going to work, what is the point, all of these sorts of things. You have to probably build out an agency who is in charge of the monitoring system, right? You need a strong judicial system for accountability, so that's lacking in a lot of developing nations. And you need sort of a lack of corruption between the pollutants and the monitors. And so, if payoffs are occurring, we need a system for monitoring that now, right? So, this gets kind of messy, right? The more I would say it becomes easier, the more concentrated the industry is, or sort of the higher up the chain you go, right? And so like if you're monitoring sort of the very top producers, maybe that can reduce the organizational difficulties. Okay, section 8.2 is about direct control measures, and these are just basically, excuse me, gross. These are basically just outright bans or mandates, right, for citizens or for companies. And so, like Europe has banned some older model cars, the combustion engine cars that are particularly bad at sort of miles per gallon. The US hasn't banned them, but they did have, like, I think it was under the Biden administration, they had like a trade out program where, like, if you bought a new, much more energy efficient car and got rid of your old one, the government would kick in some sort of subsidy, right? So, different approach. Again, they banned basically most filament light bulbs. There have been heat pump mandates for how you sort of heat or cool your home in Germany. But the experiment did not go very well, right? It's expensive. And so there was a huge uproar by citizens about, like, you can't just force us to do this. And so that you're going to get some pushback sometimes. It can also just, like, philosophically, from a freedom limitation perspective, can be problematic, right? Especially in democracies, where you're just telling people, like, outright, well, you can't drive a, say, 1950 Corvette or something like. Um, and so there are some freedom concerns there too, right? And I would actually point out that there's probably more of these likely on the horizon in the coming near future, with both energy and water shortages in place, right? And so, in the water realm, we've seen things like, some states saying, like, you can't go out and water your yard, or you can't even literally have a yard in, like, Phoenix, Arizona, right? And so I think more of that is going to be coming on the horizon as well. Um, we talked about voluntary agreements. We'll skip over that. I did want to say just a little piece on the developing country portion, section 8.5. Um, Enforcement of, even if they write these laws in developing countries, which, first of all, often doesn't happen because there's corruption involved between the companies and the politicians, right? So they just sometimes won't even put laws on the books. Other times they'll put laws on the books to sort of look good for their Democratic constituents, but they don't actually monitor it, right? Or they don't actually enforce it, right? And so this was some of the stuff with, like, it's not energy, but it goes back to, like, the 2008 financial crash in America, where, like, yeah, we had all these laws on the books where they knew they weren't supposed to be doing this, but nobody went to jail. Nobody got nobody got arraigned. Nobody did the perp walk. And so, like, it just having laws on the books doesn't mean that anything's going to happen, and that's a very likely situation in developing countries, right? They don't really have a monitoring platform, maybe. But they also don't really have any institutional strength, right? The police are weak or corrupt. The court systems are often weak or corrupt. It's difficult to have people with the expertise to do this sort of monitoring, like scientists, right? Because in some of these places, the education systems aren't all that great. There's very little seed money, right, from the government to actually do these sort of monitoring processes. And then penalties, like if you penalize, say, the local, uh, I don't know, let's say the local um, um, oil refinery or the local oil drilling platform, and you penalize them, and then they shut down because they can't pay the fine. You just lost all those jobs in a place with extraordinarily high unemployment rates too. So there are a lot of moving parts to this sort of stuff. uh, okay, I'm going to leave it there. I told you 8 and 9 would be a little bit shorter. I'm going to leave all of like the deep dive into the little models and stuff up to y'all. And I'll just, again, keep it sort of broad and global. All right, thanks for being here, and I'll see you for the next one.